You ever wonder why the moment you stop caring, they start chasing? It's strange, right? Almost like magic. But what if I told you it's not magic? It's mastery. See, most people have been lied to about love and attraction. We've been taught to chase, to give, to prove our worth over and over, to be always available, to respond instantly, to pour energy into people who barely notice it. And then we sit there exhausted, wondering why it feels like we're losing. But what if I told you the real power, the power that truly draws others in, isn't in effort, but in detachment? What if the key to making someone want you more is caring less? I know, it sounds backwards. It goes against everything you've been taught. But that's exactly the problem. Most people operate with a broken framework. They confuse neediness for connection. They think availability equals loyalty. They mistake emotional chaos for love. And in doing so, they sabotage their own value. But let's set the record straight. The truth, the real, raw, stoic truth is this: when you master yourself, others feel it. When you no longer need their validation, you become the one they seek. Not because you're playing games, but because you've reclaimed your energy. You're not trying to be irresistible. You are. Stoicism teaches us that power begins within, and when you own that power, it radiates. Now here's the exciting part. You're not just going to learn theory. This isn't about lofty philosophy or abstract ideas. This is about application. This is about putting Stoic principles into action in a way that transforms how people respond to you. We're going to unpack why detachment makes you magnetic, how silence becomes your strategy, and why pulling back can be the most irresistible move you'll ever make. You're about to see how your emotions, your attention, your peace, when properly guarded, become your greatest assets. Because here's the truth, Stoic relationships aren't cold, they're conscious. They're built on clarity, not confusion. So stay with me, because what comes next will flip your perspective and possibly your entire relationship dynamic on its head. Are you ready to take your power back? Let's dive in. 1. The inner shift. Why detachment isn't indifference. What if everything you've been taught about love, effort, and emotional investment is leading you away from what actually works? Think about this for a second. Why is it that when you pull back, when you finally stop chasing, the same person who ignored you starts wondering about you, starts reaching out, starts behaving like you suddenly matter more than ever before? The answer lies in a truth that's as old as the Stoic philosophers, but still as relevant as ever. We are not meant to derive our worth from others. Stoicism teaches us that true strength lies not in controlling others, but in mastering ourselves. And in this mastery, detachment becomes not only a shield, but a magnetic force. But let's clarify something critical right off the bat. Detachment is not the same as apathy. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's not about emotional numbness, and it's definitely not about shutting down. Detachment, in its highest form, is emotional discipline. It's choosing not to allow someone else's chaos to dictate your internal peace. It's standing strong in the middle of uncertainty and still knowing who you are. When you're emotionally reactive, always responding to texts immediately, constantly trying to explain yourself, over-analyzing their every move, you give your power away piece by piece. You live in response to someone else's behavior, rather than in alignment with your own values. Now let's pause here. How many times have you found yourself drained, anxious, waiting on someone's message, wondering if they still care? How often have you shifted your behavior just to get a reaction? Those moments are not about love. They're about fear, fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being invisible. But what Stoicism teaches us, what Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca practiced, is that peace is not something you chase, it's something you protect. And that protection starts when you no longer hinge your self-worth on external reactions. So let me ask you this. What would it look like if you stopped needing their attention? What if you could feel love without needing to be loved back in a certain way? That's not weakness. That's power. It's being rooted. Stoic relationships thrive not because of game playing or manipulation, but because they are built on emotional sovereignty. When you are emotionally sovereign, you are not cold, you are calm. You feel everything, but you respond selectively. You observe, but you don't absorb. Detachment allows you to listen without needing to react, to see clearly without the fog of desperation. And this is what makes you irresistible, because emotional stability is rare. In a world full of people begging to be seen, trying to prove their worth, someone who doesn't need the spotlight becomes naturally attractive. Your detachment signals that you are already complete, and that's magnetic. Now, let's talk about identity. If your identity is tied to how someone else treats you, you are vulnerable. Not the kind of vulnerability that invites intimacy, but the kind that leads to emotional dependence. The Stoics would tell you that freedom begins the moment you stop letting external events shape your internal reality. That includes someone's inconsistent messages, their hot and cold behavior, their approval or lack of it. If their mood dictates your mood, you're not in a relationship, you're in emotional captivity. And here's the paradox. The more you detach, the more desirable you become. Why? Because you no longer reek of need. You no longer mirror their energy hoping to get crumbs of affection. You're no longer an emotional puppet. You become the calm in the chaos, the anchor in the storm. And people crave that, not because you're unavailable, but because you're unshakable. And let me tell you, that's a very different energy. Now, some might say, but I want to be open, I want to be real. Absolutely. Detachment doesn't kill intimacy. It creates space for real connection to grow. Because when you stop chasing someone for validation, you create room for them to choose you freely. And isn't that what you really want? Someone who chooses you, not out of guilt or obligation, but because your presence adds peace to their life. That only happens when you're no longer trying to impress, to prove, to earn. Detachment isn't the end of caring. It's the beginning of conscious love. It's about giving without needing a return, loving without losing yourself, engaging without overextending. So ask yourself this: who are you when you're not trying to be enough for someone else? Who are you when you're not trying to manage their perceptions or fix their indifference? That person, the one who stands tall in solitude, is the version of you that Stoicism celebrates. It's the version that walks away when disrespected, the version that doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't fold under pressure. The one who says, I'd rather be alone with peace than together in chaos. That's not bitterness, that's clarity. So let's go deeper. What would your relationships look like if you led with that clarity? If you chose presence over pressure, boundaries over begging, purpose over pleasing? This is where the shift begins. This is where detachment becomes your liberation. And ironically, this is where they begin to feel drawn to you, not because you're playing games, but because they sense you no longer need them to feel whole. You are whole, you are centered, you are sovereign, and in that stillness, in that power, you become unforgettable. You become the one they remember when the noise fades. You become the calm they can't find anywhere else. So ask yourself not how to get them back, but how to get yourself back, because that's the real question, the real pursuit, the real relationship worth having. Stoic relationships aren't about emotional withdrawal, they're about emotional self-mastery. And it all starts when you stop reacting to the world and start returning to yourself. This is the first step, the inner shift, the transformation from emotional volatility to grounded strength. And once you embrace this shift, everything, yes, everything begins to change. 2. Emotional self-mastery, the source of true power. Let's get brutally honest. When was the last time you felt truly in control of your emotions in a relationship? Not just calm on the surface, but unshaken, unbothered, and centered no matter what they said or didn't say, no matter what message they did or didn't send. See, most people think emotional strength is about holding back tears or pretending they don't care, but that's not strength, that's suppression. And suppression always leaks. Stoicism doesn't teach you to numb yourself. It teaches you to know yourself so deeply that you no longer react out of fear, insecurity, or desperation. That's where real power lies. That's where emotional self-mastery begins. Imagine you're no longer at the mercy of their hot and cold behavior. Imagine you no longer spiral when they don't respond the way you hoped. Imagine your peace no longer depends on someone else's affection or approval. That's not detachment. For the sake of being distant, it's detachment for the sake of being rooted. And that kind of energy, it changes everything. Because in a world where people are quick to overreact, where validation is currency and emotional outbursts are normalized, calm becomes your weapon. Not a weapon to hurt, but a shield to protect. You protect your focus, you guard your peace, and you show up from a place of choice, not compulsion. Most people don't even realize how reactive they've become. They're triggered by silence, offended by space, uncomfortable in solitude. But here's the thing, if someone's distance has the power to unhinge you, that's not love, that's dependency. Emotional self-mastery breaks that chain. It makes you unpredictable, not in a manipulative way, but in a sovereign way. When you're emotionally mastered, you no longer dance to their rhythm, you move to your own tempo. And they feel it, they sense the shift. They notice you're no longer waiting by the phone, no longer chasing their affection, no longer begging for clarity. And it unnerves them. Why? Because the moment you stop being reactive, you stop being controllable. You reclaim the power dynamic not by force, but by stillness. In Stoic relationships, that stillness is your superpower, because while others are busy reacting to every text, every delay, every vague reply, you're observing, you're assessing, you're deciding. The ability to pause, reflect, and respond, rather than explode, chase, or crumble, is the essence of power. And you don't build that power overnight. You build it in the moments when your instincts scream, reach out, and you don't. When your emotions say, fix this now, but your wisdom whispers, hold. Every time you choose the high ground, every time you resist the urge to overgive or over-explain, you grow stronger. You are training your emotional muscles. You are building inner fortitude. And that strength radiates. It shows in your silence. It shows in your posture. It shows in the way you don't flinch when they pull away, because you've stopped making their behavior your responsibility. Ask yourself, who were you before you needed to be liked? Who were you before you learned to chase affection like a reward? The world told you to earn love. But Stoicism tells you that love, real love, isn't earned through sacrifice. It's honored through presence. So now the question is, can you stay present without chasing? Can you remain available to life without being emotionally available to chaos? That's the mark of someone who has mastered themselves. And let me tell you, people, notice, there's a certain stillness in someone who knows their worth, and that stillness is magnetic. You become the person who doesn't flinch, the one who doesn't react, the one who doesn't need to win someone over to feel whole. And that's exactly why they come closer, because your silence no longer threatens you, it empowers you. Your distance doesn't come from anger, it comes from clarity. Your peace isn't a performance, it's a practice, and when they can't figure you out, they start paying attention. Not because you're withholding love, but because you're withholding chaos. Because you've decided that your energy is too precious to be spent trying to please someone who doesn't even know what they want. Emotional self-mastery says, I can feel without falling apart. I can love without losing myself. I can stay open without staying exposed. And when you live from that place, everything about you shifts. your presence, your rhythm, your boundaries. You stop performing. You start existing as the full version of yourself. And that's what makes you irresistible. Not the games, not the manipulation, but the stillness, the clarity, the command of your emotions. So let me ask you again, what would it look like to stop reacting and start responding? What would it feel like to walk into every relationship knowing that you will not lose yourself no matter what happens? That's not just theory. That's stoicism in motion. That's stoic relationships done right. That's emotional sovereignty. So if this is landing with you, if you're starting to feel that spark of recognition, that sense that you're done playing small, that you're ready to take your power back, then I want you to do something bold. I want you to like this video and comment #1 if it's speaking to you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because what's coming next will only deepen your clarity and your control. Let's keep growing together. 3. Silence and scarcity, the irresistible pull of mystery. There's something undeniably magnetic about what we cannot fully grasp, something ancient and instinctual that draws us toward mystery and silence. You've seen it before. The one who doesn't over-explain, the one who listens more than they speak, the one whose energy doesn't scream, "Pick me," but quietly asserts, "I'm whole with or without you." That's not aloofness, it's sovereignty. And in the realm of Stoic relationships, this kind of presence is what makes someone unforgettable. Let's be honest, when you're always there, always replying, always offering updates, you become background noise. It doesn't mean you're not valuable. It means your value is being diluted by your over-availability. Scarcity creates demand. It's a simple truth that applies not only to economics, but to human emotion. Think about how you've responded to people in your own life. The ones who always answered instantly, who were always eager, who gave you their time without hesitation. Did you cherish them more, or did they slowly fade into predictability? Now compare that to someone who moved like water, unrushed, intentional, present but never desperate. You noticed them more, didn't you? You wondered about them. And that curiosity turned into attraction. Stoicism doesn't just encourage restraint. It elevates it to an art form. Your silence is not the absence of care, it is the presence of control. It says, "I choose where my energy goes." And that choice is what makes you powerful. It's not a tactic, it's a reflection of internal discipline. Most people over-explain because they fear being misunderstood. Most people overshare because they fear being forgotten. But when you realize your worth isn't up for negotiation, you stop offering it so freely. Your silence becomes a boundary. Your reduced presence becomes a filter. And those who truly value you will move closer, not because you demanded it, but because your absence made them feel something they weren't used to feeling. Loss, uncertainty, desire. This is not manipulation, it's reality. People do not treasure what is constantly available. That song you once loved that played too often, you stopped hearing it. That friend who messaged too frequently, you stopped replying. But the one who left space, who offered their energy with intention, that's the one who stood out. That's the one you wondered about late at night. That's the one who made you question, why do I miss them? When you create space through silence, you're not withholding, you're allowing. You're giving the other person the room to notice your absence, to reflect, to reconsider, and often to return with more appreciation. But here's the catch. For silence to be powerful, it must come from wholeness, not from hope. If you go silent just to get a reaction, you're still attached, you're still reacting. Stoic silence, true silence, comes from self-possession. It's the kind of silence that says, whether or not you respond, I'm at peace. It's unshaken, it's still. And in that stillness lies your strength. Scarcity is not about pretending to be busy or faking indifference. It's about genuinely valuing your time, your energy, your peace. When you operate from this place, you naturally become more selective, more intentional, and people feel the difference. They feel the shift when your energy is no longer theirs to access on demand. And suddenly, what was taken for granted becomes desired. You become the luxury item, not the free refill. And that shift in dynamic changes everything. When you're always available, you remove the mystery. You remove the space for someone to miss you. But when you step back, not with bitterness, not with resentment, but with confidence, you become the unanswered question. And unanswered questions keep people up at night. They replay conversations. They wonder why your tone changed. They check their phone more than they admit. And slowly, they begin to value what once felt guaranteed. Stoicism teaches that power is internal. That true control comes from mastering your own impulses, not controlling the behavior of others. And when you apply that principle to your relationships, you stop begging for closure, for clarity, for attention. You no longer need to be loud to be heard. You let your absence speak for you, and it speaks volumes. It says, "I'm not afraid of being forgotten, because I haven't forgotten myself." That kind of presence, the kind that doesn't need to fill every silence or prove every point, becomes irresistible. It challenges the other person. It unsettles them in a way that's quietly thrilling. They can't quite place it, but they know they feel something different, something deeper, something rare, and that rarity makes you unforgettable. Scarcity isn't about being inaccessible, it's about being intentional. It's about making sure that when you do show up, your presence has weight. It lands, it lingers, because it wasn't just thrown out casually, it was given with purpose. In Stoic relationships, silence isn't a game, it's a language. It communicates strength, discernment, and depth. And those who are tuned into your frequency will hear it loud and clear. They'll know that you don't speak just to fill the void. You speak when you have something of value to say. And when you do, it matters. So ask yourself, where are you? Over-explaining, over-offering, over-communicating? What would shift if you spoke a little less and observed a little more? What might they notice if you stopped showing up automatically and started moving with intention? The truth is, people don't just miss your words. They miss your presence. They miss the way you made them feel. And when you pull back, you give them the space to feel that. Not because you're punishing them, but because you're prioritizing yourself. That's the essence of Stoic relationships. Not cold detachment, but conscious space. Not forced silence, but chosen peace. When you embrace this, you no longer fear being forgotten. You trust that what's real will recognize your worth. And what isn't, it will fall away, making room for something better. That's not loss, that's liberation. Your silence is sacred, your presence is a privilege, and your scarcity, that's the spark that reignites desire, respect, and attention. Not because you chased it, but because you allowed it to rise naturally in your absence. 4. Stop chasing, start attracting, letting go as leverage. There's a moment, subtle but undeniable, when you stop chasing and everything begins to shift. It's the moment you pull your energy back, not out of spite or manipulation, but because you finally understand that the more you chase something, the more it runs. You've been conditioned to believe that love is earned through effort, that if you show up enough, care hard enough, prove yourself long enough, eventually the other person will choose you. But has that ever truly worked? Or has it left you exhausted, emotionally bankrupt, waiting on crumbs of attention that never quite satisfy your hunger for connection? The truth is, chasing creates imbalance. It says, my worth depends on your attention. It signals lack. It positions you as the one reaching, the one waiting, the one hoping. And over time, that dynamic doesn't just erode your self-respect, it kills attraction. Because desire thrives on space, on energy, on equilibrium. When you chase, you collapse that space. You erase the mystery, you suffocate the polarity, and suddenly, the person you are trying to draw closer feels the need to escape. not because they're heartless, but because the energy feels off. They sense the grasping, they feel the pull, and instinctively they pull away. But when you let go, when you truly let go, something powerful happens. The entire dynamic resets. You stop chasing and start attracting. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you've remembered who you are. You've reconnected to your value, to your center, to your peace. And that shift is felt. It's like flipping a magnet. Suddenly, the same person who once felt indifferent starts wondering, where did they go? Why aren't they reaching out? Did I lose them? Your absence becomes a question mark. Your silence becomes a presence. And without you doing anything, they begin to chase, not because you manipulated them, but because energy follows clarity. Stoicism teaches that we only suffer when we attach ourselves to what we cannot control. And in relationships, the greatest suffering often comes from trying to manage someone else's emotions, someone else's choices, someone else's readiness. But what if you stop trying? What if, instead of pouring more and more into someone who isn't ready, you redirected that energy inward? What if you stopped waiting for their validation and started honoring your own boundaries? Letting go isn't giving up, it's rising up. It's saying, I love myself enough to walk away from what's unclear. And that act, that choice, is profoundly attractive. It shows that you are not owned by your desire, you are not ruled by your emotions. You feel them, yes, but they do not lead you. You lead them. And that, my friend, is rare. In a world of over-explaining and over-pursuing, the one who can detach with grace stands out. You become the storm's eye, the stillness in the noise, the calm in the chaos, and people are drawn to that. Because detachment is not cold, it's composed. It's not the absence of care, it's the presence of self-respect. It says, I'm open to love, but I won't bleed for it. It says, I'm available, but I'm not on demand. And that balance, that poised energy, is intoxicating. But don't be fooled. Letting go doesn't mean you don't feel the loss. It means you're strong enough to move through it without chasing after someone who doesn't see your worth. It means you're wise enough to know that love cannot be forced, that the right person won't need to be convinced, that real connection flows, it's not coerced. So stop asking, what can I do to make them want me? And start asking, what am I giving to someone who's not giving back? That's the real question. That's the pivot. That's where your power begins. Because when you stop chasing, you reclaim your energy. And that energy, that grounded, focused, powerful energy, doesn't go unnoticed. It shifts how people experience you. It shifts how you experience yourself. You walk differently. You speak with more conviction. You stop explaining your worth, you embody it. And when you embody your worth, the world adjusts. Suddenly the dynamic flips. You're no longer wondering if they'll text. You're deciding if it's worth your peace. You're no longer checking their social media. You're checking in with your own growth. You're no longer reacting. You're responding. And people feel that. They feel the difference between someone who needs them and someone who chooses them. They sense the integrity, the strength, the calm. And that, more than any game or tactic, is what draws them in. So if you're caught in a cycle of overgiving, over-pursuing, over-waiting, it's time to pause. It's time to shift. Because chasing someone who's not choosing you isn't noble. It's neglectful. Not of them, but of yourself. And you deserve better. Not just from others, but from yourself. You deserve your own attention, your own validation, your own devotion. And when you give yourself those things, when you let go of what drains you, you become magnetic. Not because you're trying to but because you've become whole. That's the power of detachment. That's the leverage of letting go. That's the essence of Stoic relationships. Not holding on until it hurts, but releasing with strength and walking with peace. So if this message is resonating with you, if you're ready to step out of the chase and into your own power, then do this. Like this video and comment number 1 to let me know you're done chasing and ready to start attracting. And Don't forget to subscribe, because this journey into clarity, confidence, and emotional freedom is just beginning. 5. Breaking the illusion of control. Peace over performance. There's a quiet war happening inside so many relationships, a constant invisible push and pull between the desire to be loved and the desperate attempt to control how that love unfolds. You've felt it, haven't you? That tension in your chest when they don't text back right away. The rapid thoughts running through your mind as you try to decode their silence. The inner negotiations you perform with yourself as you try to choose the right words, the perfect timing, the flawless tone to get the reaction you want. That's not love, that's performance. And it's exhausting, because deep down, you're not just trying to communicate, you're trying to control. You want certainty, you want validation, you want to ensure they stay, so you tailor yourself to fit their preferences, to avoid conflict, to be seen in the best possible light. But in doing so, you slowly lose your peace. You step into a version of yourself that isn't authentic. It's reactive, it's crafted, it's fragile. And the more you try to control the outcome, the more anxious you become, because control, my friend, is an illusion. And the Stoics knew this well. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not just a quote. That's a way of life. When you base your emotional state on things you can't control, like someone else's mood, their attention, their choices, you give your power away. You become tethered to unpredictability, and your sense of self rises and falls with their behavior. One compliment and you're flying. One cold response and you're crashing. And just like that, your peace becomes a prisoner of their inconsistency. But here's the liberating truth. You were never meant to control anyone, not how they feel, not what they choose, not when or if they decide to love you back. All of that is outside your domain. And the moment you accept that, something miraculous happens. You reclaim your freedom. You stop obsessing over whether they noticed your story, whether they liked your message, whether they're talking to someone else. You stop scripting conversations in your head, rehearsing how to win them. You stop living in performance mode. Instead, you drop into presence. You return to yourself. You start asking different questions, not "How do I make them love me?" but "Am I living in alignment with my values?" Not "How do I get them to stay?" but "Am I proud of how I show up regardless of the outcome?" That's what peace looks like. And ironically, that peace is what creates real connection. Because people can feel when your energy is clean. They can sense when you're not trying to manipulate or manage their experience. When you speak without hidden motives. When your presence isn't a sales pitch. That's when trust begins. That's when real intimacy becomes possible. Because true intimacy can only grow in truth. Not in performance, not in pressure, not in fear. But to live this way, to truly let go of control, you have to face something most people avoid at all costs: uncertainty. You have to be willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. Will they come back? Will they care as much as you do? Will they stay? These are questions without guarantees, and that's terrifying, but it's also necessary. Because if your peace depends on guarantees, it was never peace to begin with. It was just control in disguise. And control will always fail you. Stoicism teaches us to focus only on what we can influence: our thoughts, our actions, our attitude. Everything else, we observe it, we don't grip it. And in doing so, we create space, not just in our minds, but in our relationships. Space for the other person to show up freely. Space for them to choose us, not out of guilt or pressure, but out of genuine desire. And if they don't, that space becomes your sanctuary, not your sorrow. Because letting go of control isn't the same as letting go of care. It's about trusting yourself more than the outcome. It's about valuing your peace more than their performance. It's about no longer needing to fix or prove or manage. It's about being okay with not knowing and still showing up with honesty, with clarity, with love, not to win them, but to honor yourself. Imagine this, a relationship where you're no longer afraid of saying the wrong thing, where you don't shrink yourself to avoid conflict, where you don't overthink every text, where your love isn't a strategy, but a state of being. That's what happens when you stop performing and start being. That's what happens when you stop trying to control the narrative and start trusting the truth. And yes, it will be uncomfortable at first. You'll feel exposed. You'll feel uncertain. You'll want to reach for old habits, to people please, to explain, to fix. But stay with it. Breathe through it. Because every time you resist the urge to control, you grow. Every time you choose peace over panic, you expand. Every time you let go of performance and drop into presence, you heal. And the more you live this way, the more natural it becomes. You start showing up as the most powerful version of yourself, not the loudest, not the most impressive, but the most grounded. And that version of you is unshakable. That version of you doesn't chase, they attract, not because they're playing games, but because their energy is aligned, because they know who they are, because their peace is non-negotiable. This is the heart of Stoic relationships, not control, not performance, but peace. And from that peace, everything changes. You no longer need to be chosen to feel worthy. You no longer need perfect words to feel heard. You no longer need perfect outcomes to feel safe. You become the source of your own validation. And when you live that truth, the need to control fades, the performance drops, and what's left is something real, something powerful, something free. 6. Transcending the game, building lasting inner peace. There comes a point on this journey, a critical turning point, when you realize that the whole game you've been playing wasn't about love at all. It was about control. It was about performance. It was about chasing worthiness through someone else's attention. But love, real love, doesn't live in the realm of games. It lives in presence, in authenticity, in freedom. And that's what you begin to reclaim when you finally decide to transcend the game. Transcending the game doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop performing. You stop bending, chasing, overgiving. You stop monitoring their every move. Stop strategizing how to win them back. Stop giving up pieces of yourself to keep someone who doesn't even know how to hold you. You rise above the patterns. You step out of the loop. You stop living for the next reply, the next compliment, the next emotional breadcrumb. And in doing so, you find something infinitely more valuable than any reaction you could provoke from them. You find peace. That peace doesn't come from silence alone. It comes from alignment, from choosing to stop explaining your worth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, from choosing not to give more to people who offer you less, from realizing that if someone wants to go, you don't block the door. You open it wider. Not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself more than you care about keeping someone who doesn't see you. That's not arrogance, that's maturity, that's stoicism in action, because stoicism teaches that freedom is found not in changing the external world, but in mastering your inner one. And nowhere is that more powerful than in love. When you transcend the game, you stop hoping for someone to complete you. You stop waiting for someone to recognize your value. You stop anchoring your identity in the unpredictable tides of their mood or approval. You become the constant in your own story, the rock, the grounded presence, and suddenly the fear of being forgotten dissolves. The anxiety of not being enough vanishes, because you remember what the world made you forget, that you were already enough. That your presence, when rooted in peace, is more than enough. And ironically, that's when everything changes. That's when people who once took you for granted begin to notice your absence. That's when the ones who thought they had control realize they never really did, because what they controlled was a version of you that didn't know your own power. But now, Now you've remembered, now you've returned to yourself, and in that return you've become untouchable, not unreachable, but undisturbed. You still care, you still feel, but you're no longer shaken by their inconsistencies. You're no longer defined by their validation. You are rooted in something deeper, something eternal, your peace. And peace is the most powerful energy on earth. It doesn't need to scream to be heard. It doesn't need to prove itself to be felt. It just is. And when you walk in that peace, when you speak from that peace, when you move through life with that peace, it shifts everything. People start to treat you differently, not because you demanded it, but because your energy commands it, not through control, but through calm, not through games, but through presence. And you realize finally that the real game was never about getting them to choose you. It was about choosing yourself, about becoming so deeply connected to your own soul, so attuned to your own worth, that no one's rejection could shake you, and no one's attention could seduce you into forgetting your truth. You stop craving their affection, not because you don't want connection, but because you no longer need it to feel whole. You are whole. You stop chasing closure, not because you don't care, but because you've created your own. You stop fighting for clarity, not because it doesn't matter, but because you've made peace with the unknown. And this peace, this unshakable foundation, becomes your new home. You begin to protect it fiercely, not by building walls, but by setting standards. By choosing peace over drama, silence over reaction, stillness over chaos, and this becomes your compass. In every interaction, in every relationship, in every moment where you must decide, do I stay here or do I return to myself? That's the power of transcending the game. It's not about walking away from people, it's about walking away from patterns, from cycles, from old stories that told you your worth depended on someone else's gaze. You rewrite the narrative, you reclaim the pen, and the story you write now, it's one of sovereignty, serenity, and strength. Stoic relationships thrive because they are built on this foundation, not need, not desperation, but choice, mutual respect, inner clarity. And when you live from that place, something magical happens. You stop attracting chaos. You stop tolerating disrespect. You stop settling for half love and almost effort. You become magnetic, not because you tried to be, but because peace is magnetic. Wholeness is magnetic. Truth is magnetic. And when people encounter someone who no longer plays the game, they don't always know what to do. Some will try to pull you back into the cycle. Some will test your boundaries. Some will walk away because they cannot meet you there. Let them. Because those who remain, those who respect your stillness, honor your peace, rise to meet your presence, they are the ones worth keeping. They are the ones who see you truly, clearly, authentically, and they don't need the game. They never did. So if you've reached this point, if something in your spirit is stirring, if you feel the truth of these words deep in your core, then welcome home. You are exactly where you're meant to be. You're not here to chase. You're here to align. You're not here to perform. You're here to be. You're not here to win them over. You're here to win yourself back, and you just did. If this part of the video resonated with you, like it and comment number 1 to let me know you're done with the games and living in your peace. And subscribe, because what's coming next will continue to help you deepen that stillness, that clarity, that calm. Stay rooted, because this is just the beginning. By now, something deep within you should feel different. Not because you've added something new, but because you've begun shedding what never belonged in the first place. You've peeled back the layers of illusion, of need, of performance. And underneath it all, you've found stillness, real stillness. Not the kind that comes from numbing or avoidance, but the kind that emerges when you finally stop letting someone else's approval dictate your emotional weather. This isn't about winning, it's about waking up. Waking up to the truth that everything you were looking for from them, validation, affection, certainty, peace, was never theirs to give. It was yours all along. And now that you've seen it, now that you've remembered who you are, you can't go back. You can't pretend that chasing ever brought you closer to love. You can't unlearn that silence is strength. You can't unknow the calm that arrives when you finally put down the burden of control. What you're feeling is not detachment for the sake of distance. It's self-ownership. It's the quiet knowing that you no longer have to perform your worth or audition for connection. You've outgrown the games, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. That clarity is your compass now. It tells you when to stay, when to speak, when to walk away, not based on fear, but based on alignment. No more bending just to be liked. No more breaking yourself just to be chosen. Because now you know, being chosen means nothing if you're not choosing yourself. And here's the unexpected beauty of it all. The more you embody this truth, the more life responds. Not always with applause, not always with immediate ease, but with alignment. You start attracting people who don't need to be convinced of your worth. You start building connections rooted in mutual respect, not emotional games. And even when things don't work out, you don't fall apart because you're no longer depending on the outcome to feel whole. Your worth doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't tremble. It doesn't disappear when someone leaves. It remains steady, grounded, yours. That's the legacy of Stoicism. Not a cold heart, but an unshaken soul. A presence that's felt not because it demands attention, but because it doesn't. A kind of stillness that speaks louder than any performance ever could. And in that stillness, you become magnetic. Not to everyone, but to the ones who are ready. Ready for truth. Ready for depth. Ready for real. Because Stoic relationships aren't for the faint-hearted. They're not built on adrenaline and chaos. They're not fueled by push-pull patterns or emotional volatility. They're built on peace, on clarity, on two people who don't need to complete each other, but who choose to walk side by side, whole, rooted, free. So if you feel a soft ache in your chest right now, a quiet sadness for all the versions of you that overgave, over-explained, overstayed, honor that. Mourn them, but don't carry them forward. They brought you here, and now it's time to let them rest. You're not that person anymore. You've outgrown the chase. You've outgrown the need to convince someone to love you. You've outgrown the story that your value depends on their attention. You've stepped into something sacred, yourself. And from this place, every choice becomes a reflection of your power. Every no becomes an act of self-respect. Every silence becomes a boundary. Every step forward becomes a reclamation of your peace. You no longer react to chaos. You observe it. You no longer fear disconnection. You understand it. You no longer beg for closure. You create it. This is not indifference. This is emotional clarity. This is not withdrawal. This is sovereignty. And sovereignty is quiet, but it echoes. It moves through your presence, your posture, your decisions. It whispers, I know who I am and I do not need you to confirm it. That's where freedom lives. Not in being untouchable, but in being unfazed. Not in having all the answers, but in being unshaken by uncertainty. Not in avoiding love, but in loving without losing yourself. And here's the paradox that Stoicism has known for centuries. The more detached you are from needing love, the more deeply and authentically you can give it. Because you're no longer giving to get. You're no longer attaching your identity to the response. You're simply being. And that kind of love, clean, grounded, choice-based, is rare. It's rare because it requires depth. It requires you to look at yourself honestly, to hold your own heart with compassion, to stop outsourcing your emotional needs to people who were never meant to carry them. It requires you to heal, to grieve, to grow. And growth is not linear. Some days you'll forget, you'll want to reach out, to chase, to perform again. That's okay, just don't stay there. Remember what you've learned. Remember what you've lived. Remember that your peace is not a performance, it's a practice. And every time you return to it, every time you choose silence over reaction, presence over pressure, stillness over chaos, you build it stronger. You become the kind of person who doesn't just survive love, you elevate it, you refine it, you bring truth into it. And even when it ends, it doesn't define you, because you've stopped playing the game. And when the game is over, when you're no longer chasing validation, when you're no longer afraid of being alone, you finally meet the one person who will never leave you. You, your peace, your center, your truth. That is your home now. Let the world spin. Let others come and go. You remain, and in that stillness, you are free.